Hollow Street is a place of endless night, shrouded in fog that never lifts and guarded by lanterns that never die. For generations, its cursed glow has trapped families within their homes after sunset, erasing anyone who dares step outside. Eleanor Morland has lived with the whispers and vanishes, but when the lantern at her own door begins to falter, she knows the curse is shifting. With her son Thomas at her side and haunted by the memory of her vanished husband, Eleanor must confront the shadows and the lantern wraith that lurks within the mist before the last light fades. Hollow Street had always been shrouded in mist, a persistent fog that clung to the cobblestones like a living thing. Tonight, as every night, it crept along the narrow Victorian lane with a slow, deliberate grace, swallowing the gas lamps and muffling the distant echoes of a city that felt far away. The street lanterns burned with an unwavering light, their flames steady and eternal, as if defying time itself. The orange glow bled through the murk, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to stretch and twist like the fingers of forgotten ghosts. At the threshold of number 14, Eleanor Morland stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the lantern that hung by the front door. Her tall frame was silhouetted against the amber light spilling from the windows behind her. The chill of the fog seeped through her thin shawl, but she barely noticed. Her attention was consumed by the faintest irregularity in the lantern's flame. For years, the lantern had burned with perfect consistency, a constant comfort in a world where leaving the house after sunset meant vanishing without trace. But now, as she watched, a subtle flicker disturbed the steady glow. It was almost imperceptible, a brief, shuddering pulse, yet it sent a ripple of unease through her chest. Eleanor's sharp eyes narrowed. She raised a hand, as if to steady the flame, but the glass was cold beneath her fingers. The dimming was not a trick of the light or a gust of wind. It was something else, something wrong. It whispered of change in the endless night that cloaked Hollow Street. Behind her, the house was quiet. Thomas, her teenage son, had retired early, restless and uneasy about the strange whispers that drifted like smoke through the neighborhood. Eleanor listened for the familiar creaks and sighs of the old Victorian home, the comforting sounds that tethered her to reality. But tonight, even the house seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The legend of Hollow Street was as old as the lanterns themselves. Locals spoke in hushed tones of the curse, a dark enchantment that bound the residents to their homes after dusk, trapping their souls in an eternal twilight. Those who dared to step outside were swallowed by the fog, erased from existence. Eleanor had grown up with the stories, skeptical yet unable to deny the truth etched in the absence of the vanished. The street beyond the moorland doorstep was a tableau of eerie stillness. Houses stood with windows shuttered tight, their occupants locked away in fearful compliance. The lanterns, like sentinels, marked the boundary between safety and oblivion. Eleanor's gaze traveled along the fog-draped street, past the faint outlines of neighbors' homes where shadows flickered behind curtains. Some windows glowed softly, others were darkened, silent witnesses to lives held hostage by the curse. Her thoughts drifted to the neighbors who had disappeared over the years, families who had once laughed and lived behind those walls, now reduced to whispers and empty doorsteps. The weight of their absence pressed on her like the fog itself. From somewhere nearby, a faint murmur rose, the low, nervous voices of those still trapped. Eleanor recognized the trembling tones of Martha Griggs, her elderly neighbor, who paced behind her shuttered window with hands clenched tightly around a threadbare shawl. Eleanor had heard the stories Martha told, stories of flickering lights and ghostly figures drifting just beyond the lantern's glow. Fear was a tangible presence in Hollow Street, as real as the fog, as binding as the curse. Suddenly, Eleanor's attention snapped back to her own lantern. The flicker returned, more pronounced this time, casting grotesque shadows that danced against the brick walls. The familiar objects in her hallway twisted into sinister shapes. A coat rack morphed into a clawed hand. A portrait frame seemed to leer with hollow eyes. She swallowed a rising tide of panic but forced herself to breathe steadily. The lantern was dying. She took a step inside, closing the door against the creeping chill. The lamp's glass shimmered faintly in the dim light. A fragile barrier between the darkness and the fragile sanctuary Eleanor had built for her family. She thought of Jacob, her husband, vanished on a night much like this, swallowed by the fog after stepping beyond their doorstep. The memory was a knife edge, sharp, painful, unresolved. Eleanor moved to the mantel and retrieved a small, worn journal from a stack of books. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it, revealing pages filled with careful notes and sketches, observations of the lantern's steady light, records of strange sounds, and the faint outlines of shadows she couldn't explain. Tonight, she would add the flickering flame, the first sign that the curse's grip was loosening or tightening. Outside, the night deepened. The fog thickened and curled like living fingers around the street lamps. Eleanor's breath formed a pale mist as she exhaled, her heart pounding with the weight of what was to come. The ever-burning lanterns promised safety, but the moorland lantern's faltering light was a harbinger of doom. She glanced toward Thomas's room, a faint glow beneath the door hinting at the restless boy's wakefulness. The curse was no longer an abstract terror. It was a threat closing in on her family. Eleanor steeled herself. Whatever lay beyond the flicker, she would face it. For Thomas, for herself, for the memory of Jacob. The night stretched on, endless and suffocating, and the lantern flickered again, a dying heartbeat in the heart of Hollow Street. But tonight, Eleanor Morland would not turn away. The fog had thickened since morning, a dense, clammy blanket that clung to Hollow Street with a suffocating insistence. Eleanor Morland stood at the threshold of her doorway, eyes narrowing into the swirling grey veil that blurred the gas lamp's unwavering golden glow. The lanterns, eternal sentinels of this cursed street, cast their light through the mist, never flickering, never dying except, as Eleanor had begun to dread, her own lantern at the moorland home. There, she had noticed a faint, almost imperceptible falter in its steady flame, like the stuttering breath of something struggling to survive. Her gaze drifted uneasily to the shadows dancing at the edges of the fog. Shapes flitted just beyond the reach of the lanterns, light blurred, shifting silhouettes that vanished when she blinked or turned her head. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional soft murmur of the wind curling through the narrow street and the distant clatter of shutters being hastily closed. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine, though the air was not cold. It was the kind of chill born from the unseen and uncertain. Inside the dim parlor, Thomas Morland sat hunched over the family's lantern, his hands deft but shaking as he adjusted the wick and fussed over the glass casing. His tousled brown hair fell into his eyes as he leaned closer, lips pressed into a thin line of concentration. He had become obsessed with the lantern's well-being, as if repairing its faltering flame could stave off the creeping dread that had begun to grip their home. Eleanor watched him quietly, her heart tightening with a mixture of pride and helplessness. "Mother," Thomas whispered suddenly, not looking up, "do you think it's possible to fix it? To make the light strong again?" Eleanor hesitated before answering, her voice low but steady. "I don't know, Thomas, but we have to try." Outside, the street had grown quieter still. The neighbors, their faces drawn and pale, hurried to close their windows and bolt their doors well before dusk. Eleanor's ears caught the faintest hint of sobbing carried on the wind, a sound that sent a shudder through her. It came from the Griggs household next door, where Martha Griggs, an elderly woman always wrapped in a shawl, had been seen trembling as she watched the sunset from behind shuttered windows. News had spread like wildfire through Hollow Street. Another family had vanished after dark, leaving behind an empty house swallowed by the ever-thickening fog. The neighbors whispered of the curse in hushed tones, clutching talismans and muttering prayers, but none dared to venture beyond their thresholds after nightfall. Eleanor's skepticism, long-standing despite the stories, began to waver under the weight of these losses. That evening, Eleanor found herself drawn to the window, staring into the creeping gloom. The lanterns cast long, distorted shadows that flickered and twisted as if alive. The strange shapes in the fog seemed to grow bolder, their presence a dark pulse just beyond the edge of vision. The air felt charged, as if the night itself was holding its breath. "Thomas," Eleanor said quietly, turning from the window. "We must prepare. Whatever is out there, it's getting closer." He nodded, determination flashing in his serious eyes. "I'll keep working on the lantern. It's the only thing keeping us safe." Eleanor moved to light the candles around the room, their small flames flickering in defiance of the encroaching darkness. She retrieved her journal and began to document the events unfolding around her. The flickers in the lantern's light, the shifting shadows in the fog, the growing silence and fear that gripped Hollow Street. As the night deepened, the weight of the curse pressed heavier on her chest. She could no longer ignore the signs. The legends might have been whispered warnings, but now they were a living nightmare creeping through the mist. The question that haunted her was no longer if the lantern's light would fail, but what darkness would be unleashed when it finally did. Outside, unseen eyes watched from the fog, waiting for the light to falter, for the shadows to claim their prey. And in the silence, Eleanor made a silent vow she would uncover the truth behind the curse, no matter the cost. For her family, for the lost, and for the street that had become both prison and battleground. The night was far from over, and the shadows among the fog were only beginning to stir. The persistent fog that smothered Hollow Street seemed to press itself against Eleanor Morland's thin window pane. Each droplet of moisture a muted echo of the secrets the street held. She sat hunched over her journal, the dim light of the family's stubborn lantern casting long, trembling shadows across the cramped room. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic, like old blood or rust. Outside, the silence was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional sigh of the fog as it slithered between the gas lamps, which burned with an unnatural steadiness. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she wrote, describing the whispering voices she'd caught at the edges of hearing over the past few nights. A low susurrating murmur that seemed woven into the very fabric of the fog, slipping through the cracks of her shuttered window and curling around her like a living thing. She paused, her sharp eyes lifting to the dark glass, straining to pierce the gloom. For a moment, a flicker of movement caught her attention, a shadow darting just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving her breath hitching in her chest. The journal was an act of defiance, as much as documentation, a way to keep the encroaching darkness at bay, to impose order on the creeping chaos. Eleanor's thoughts kept returning to Agnes Crowley, the reclusive woman who had lived at the far end of Hollow Street for as long as anyone could remember. Rumored to be touched by strange knowledge, Agnes was both feared and disregarded by the neighbors, wrapped in layers of whispered stories and suspicion. But Eleanor knew she had to seek her out. If the curse was real, If the lanterns truly held the street captive in this endless night, then Agnes might hold the key to understanding. Bundling herself against the chill, Eleanor stepped out into the fog-choked street. The gas lamps cast halos of golden light, their steady flames impervious to the damp air. But the fog swallowed the street's edges, turning familiar houses into ghostly silhouettes. Her footsteps were muffled, swallowed by the thick carpet of mist that clung to the cobblestones. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint creak of a shutter or the distant bark of a dog. She reached Agnes's cottage, a crooked, weather-beaten structure half hidden behind overgrown hedges. The windows glowed faintly, promising warmth and answers. Eleanor hesitated before knocking, the sound sharp and urgent in the stillness. The door creaked open almost immediately, revealing the small, cluttered interior lit by an assortment of candles and lanterns of every shape and size. Agnes Crowley stood framed in the doorway, a slender figure draped in layers of dark, worn fabric. Her silver hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her eyes sharp and piercing seemed to look right through Eleanor, weighing her very soul. Without a word, she motioned Eleanor inside. The air inside was thick with the scent of herbs, old paper, and something faintly acrid smoke from a smouldering incense, perhaps, or something less natural. Shelves bowed under the weight of dusty tomes, jars filled with strange roots and powders, and odd artifacts that seemed to hum with a silent power. Agnes gestured to a worn chair near a small fire, and Eleanor seated herself, feeling the weight of the room's secrets pressing down upon her. Agnes spoke in riddles at first, her voice a low murmur blending with the crackling fire. She spoke of the lanterns, their cursed light, and the shadowy entity bound to them, the lantern wraith. Her words painted a picture of a ritual gone wrong centuries ago, when the townsfolk had tried to imprison a malevolent force, only to bind it to the very light meant to protect them. The curse was both jailer and guardian, a cruel tether holding the street in perpetual twilight. Eleanor listened, each revelation a hammer blow to her skepticism. The whispers she'd heard, the shadows that flickered at the edge of sight, they were not figments of exhaustion or imagination, but manifestations of a darkness clawing to break free. Agnes's eyes glinted with a mixture of sorrow and warning as she produced a brittle, folded note, scrawled with symbols Eleanor barely understood. "This," Agnes said, pressing the paper into Eleanor's hand, "is what remains of the ritual's record. It holds clues to the curse's undoing, but beware, the price of knowledge is steep." A shiver ran down Eleanor's spine as the fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows like a living thing. She folded the note carefully, tucking it into her coat. The journey back home was a blur of swirling mist and half-heard voices. The whispers had grown louder now, no longer teasing at the edges of sound, but pressing close, urgent and insistent. Back in the sanctuary of her parlor, Eleanor locked the door and lit every candle she could find, the flickering flames casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls. She opened her journal once more, the pen moving with renewed purpose as she transcribed Agnes's riddles and the fragmented history of Hollow Street's curse. Her mind raced with questions and possibilities, the weight of her discoveries settling like stones in her chest. Outside, the fog thickened still, swallowing the street in silence and shadow. The lanterns burned on, their light steady but cold, an eternal prison. Eleanor's resolve hardened. She would not let her family vanish into that endless night. Whatever the cost, she would uncover the truth beneath the whispers in Hollow Street. As the candlelight flickered and the night stretched on, Eleanor's eyes caught movement once again, a fleeting shadow at the window, watching, waiting. The game had begun, and the darkness was eager to claim its due. The dim light of the moorland lantern flickered once more, a hesitant pulse that seemed to shudder against the thickening dusk. Eleanor stood by the hearth, her sharp eyes fixed on the wavering glow that had always been their beacon in the endless night of Hollow Street. Tonight, though, the familiar steady flame betrayed her, faltering, uncertain, casting grotesque shadows that twisted and stretched across the cracked walls like sinister phantoms. The room, usually a refuge from the chill fog that clung to the street outside, now felt claustrophobic and alien, as if the very air carried a weight of unseen menace. Thomas sat nearby, shoulders hunched, his lean frame betraying a restless energy that no amount of quiet could quell. His tousled brown hair fell over his serious expression as he fidgeted with the lantern's brass fittings, attempting repairs by the flickering candlelight. "It's just a mechanism," he muttered, more to himself than to Eleanor. "I can fix this. It's all just old parts, nothing supernatural." Eleanor's gaze softened briefly, catching the familiar stubbornness in her son's eyes, but the unease in her chest deepened. She had seen the lantern's flames falter before, but never like this, never with such violent flickers that seemed to claw at the edges of the light, threatening to snuff it out entirely. Later, as Thomas continued his futile attempts to steady the lantern, Eleanor retreated to the small study Agnes Crowley had allowed her to access. The air was thick with the scent of damp paper and dust. The dim room, lit only by a single candle whose flame danced in tandem with the lantern's uncertain glow in the adjacent room. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the leather-bound tome Agnes had given her. Its ancient pages, brittle but filled with cryptic symbols and faded script. The words spoke of rituals long forgotten, of a time when Hollow Street was young and the lanterns were first lit not as mere sources of light, but as prisons, binding a dark force to the fog and shadows that perpetually blanketed the street. Her breath caught when she read the passage, detailing a failed ritual meant to imprison a malevolent entity, an errant force that became the Lantern Wraith, a guardian and jailer born of desperation and tragedy. The lanterns, it seemed, were both the curse and the key, their eternal light a prison that kept the street's inhabitants trapped in an unending twilight. A sudden creak from the floorboards startled Eleanor. She slipped the book shut and turned, her eyes meeting Thomas's. His face was pale, the earlier frustration replaced by a dawning fear. He had stopped his repairs and now watched the lantern with a mixture of hope and dread. "Mum," he whispered, "I don't think this is just a broken lantern anymore." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Neither do I, but now that I understand what we're facing, we can't let the darkness win. We have to fight it." Outside, the fog pressed against the window panes like a living thing, muffling the distant sounds of the street and swallowing the faint glow of neighboring lanterns. Eleanor felt the weight of the curse settle heavier in her bones, but within her, a flicker of resolve kindled a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the dim light could be restored. As she returned to the parlor, the lantern's flame flickered violently, a sudden gust from the fog outside threatening to extinguish it. Eleanor's hands steadied the lamp, her breath catching as the shadows recoiled. In that suspended moment between light and darkness, she vowed to unravel the curse's secrets, no matter the cost. The dim light faded again, but Eleanor's determination burned brighter than ever. The battle for Hollow Street had only just begun. The night outside whispered promises of dread and despair, but within the moorland home, a steely defiance took root, a fragile beacon in the encroaching gloom. The evening air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading embers as Eleanor Morland approached the weathered doorstep of Agnes Crowley's home. The house itself seemed swallowed by the dense fog that curled and twisted along Hollow Street like a restless beast, its windows dim with the glow of oil lamps struggling against the encroaching night. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, the familiar weight of her journal in her coat pocket grounding her trembling resolve. She had come seeking answers, and though the chill of the air seeped through her layers, a fiercer chill gnawed at her thoughts, a mixture of dread and desperate hope. Agnes greeted her at the door, her sharp eyes glinting beneath silver lashes, a knowing smile touching her cracked lips. "Come in, Eleanor," she urged, her voice thin but steady. "The night grows thick, and with it, the shadows deepen." Inside, the parlor was a sanctuary of secrets. Shelves bowed under the weight of ancient tomes, their spines cracked and yellowed, while trinket strange talismans and dried herbs hung from ceiling beams and cluttered tables. The flicker of a single lantern cast long, quivering shadows, dancing like restless spirits across the room. Agnes motioned toward a faded rug beneath a small writing desk, where a loose floorboard peeked from beneath its faded edge, with a creak that seemed louder than the silence warranted. Agnes pried the board aside, revealing a shallow compartment lined with dust and cobwebs. Inside lay brittle manuscripts, their ink faded to a ghostly sepia, alongside yellowed sketches of Hollow Street as it might have looked centuries before the street lanterns freshly installed, their light eerily vibrant even in the drawings. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she unfolded one of the papers. The script was ornate, the language archaic, but the message was clear. A ritual had been performed here long ago, a desperate attempt to imprison a malevolent force now known as the Lantern Wraith. The ritual, however, had failed, binding the entity not just to the lantern's light, but to the street itself, ensnaring all who dwelled there in an endless night. As Eleanor absorbed this revelation, a sudden chill swept through the room. The lantern's flame flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows along the walls. Outside, the fog thickened, pressing against the window panes, like spectral fingers reaching for warmth. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as vague shapes appeared and vanished within the mist phantoms. Perhaps, or the lost souls trapped by the curse. Later that evening, back in her modest home, Eleanor found herself confronted by Samuel Hargrove, the local reporter whose youthful skepticism had begun to waver in the face of mounting strange occurrences. He paced the small sitting room, notebook in hand, his sharp eyes fixed intently on Eleanor. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that this curse, it's tied to some ancient magic, and that the lanterns themselves are the prison?" Eleanor nodded, her voice steady despite the turmoil roiling within her. "Yes, and until that prison is broken, the fog will not lift, and the disappearances will continue." Samuel scribbled notes rapidly, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning acceptance. "This changes everything. The police, the town, they're all ignoring what's really happening. But if this is true, then we're all trapped in this nightmare." The conversation lingered between them, a fragile bridge between doubt and conviction. As Samuel left, Eleanor's thoughts returned to Annis's archives, the failed ritual, the binding of the Lantern Wraith, and the price paid by those who had tried to break free. Days later, Eleanor returned to Annis's home, where the older woman sat by the fireplace, the flickering flames illuminating the deep lines etched by years of sorrow and secrecy across her face. "My family," Agnes began, her voice a soft tremble, "once sought to end this curse. They believed knowledge and will could undo what was done. But the ritual was flawed, born of desperation and ignorance. She produced a worn journal, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and heart-wrenching accounts of loss and failure. The lantern wraith is no mere ghost. It is a guardian and jailer, bound by the light it haunts. To break the curse, one must confront both the darkness and the light it controls. Eleanor listened, the weight of the revelation settling like a stone in her chest. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but clarity had finally pierced the fog of uncertainty. As the night deepened, Hollow Street lay shrouded in its relentless mist, the lanterns casting their cursed glow over the empty streets. The phantoms drifted closer, their silent lament a mournful echo of lives lost and secrets buried. Eleanor's resolve hardened. The echoes of the past had spoken now. It was time to act, to face the lantern wraith and the darkness that had claimed so many. Outside, a distant bell tolled, a sound swallowed quickly by the thickening fog. Eleanor closed her journal, the pages whispering like ghosts in the quiet room. Tomorrow, she would begin the fight for Hollow Street's soul. The evening air was heavy with a creeping chill as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Hollow Street into its familiar shroud of fog and lantern light. Eleanor Morland stood by the window, her gaze tracing the outlines of neighboring houses, each framed by the unyielding glow of their lanterns. The usual quiet was fractured by a sudden knock at the door, sharp and urgent. Martha Griggs stumbled inside, her frail frame shaking, eyes wide and wild. "They're gone, Eleanor," she gasped, clutching her shawl tighter as if it could shield her from the invisible menace. The Hendersons vanished as the lanterns lit up. "I saw it, heard them calling, then nothing, just the fog swallowing them whole." Eleanor's heart pounded, the dread she had tried to suppress flooding through her veins. "Did you see where they went?" she asked, voice barely more than a whisper. Martha shook her head, tears brimming. "No, just gone." She sank into a chair, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "I barely escaped. I thought next would be me." Thomas appeared behind Eleanor, his youthful face pale but determined. "We need to barricade the doors," he urged, already moving to help. The flickering light from their own lantern wavered uncertainly, casting eerie shadows that danced against the wallpaper. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the fog itself was pressing against the windows, eager to claim another victim. Outside, the street was unnervingly silent, save for the distant drip of moisture from the gas lamps and the faint rustle of dead leaves. Eleanor's mind raced each vanished family, a stark reminder that the curse was tightening its grip. "We can't just wait," she said firmly. "We have to understand what's happening before it's too late." The doorbell rang unexpectedly, and Eleanor opened it to find Samuel Hargrove, the young reporter whose persistent inquiries had begun to unsettle the town. His sharp eyes reflected a mix of skepticism and concern. "Mrs. Morland," he said, not waiting for an invitation. "People are talking. The disappearances this curses, there any truth to it?" Eleanor hesitated, weighing the danger of revealing too much against the need for an ally. "There's more to this street than anyone admits," she replied cautiously. "And the lanterns, they hold us here." Samuel's gaze drifted to the dimming light of their lantern. "If what you say is true, then why do the lanterns never go out?" "Because they're cursed," Eleanor answered softly, "and we're prisoners to their light." As dusk deepened, the fog thickened, swallowing sound and light until the world beyond their home was reduced to a grey, whispering void. Suddenly, a faint cry echoed from down the street, panicked footsteps, fading into silence. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Another family had vanished. She closed the shutters, bolted the doors, and gathered Thomas and Martha close. "We're not safe," she murmured. "Not until we find a way to break this curse." Outside, Samuel lingered, his notebook forgotten in his hand as the weight of the night settled over Hollow Street. The lanterns glowed stubbornly, their cursed light a beacon and a prison. And Eleanor knew the battle for survival was only just beginning. The air inside Agnes Crowley's parlor was thick with the scent of aged paper and faint incense. Eleanor's footsteps echoed softly on the creaking floorboards as she crossed the threshold, the dim glow from a single oil lamp casting wavering shadows that danced like restless spirits on the walls. Agnes sat by the hearth, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes sharp and watchful beneath silver brows that arched like ancient arches of stone. The room was a museum of forgotten knowledge shelves, sagging beneath the weight of dusty tomes, curious talismans hanging from the ceiling beams, and faded drawings pinned to the walls that whispered secrets of the occult. Eleanor swallowed the knot of unease that had formed in her throat. "Mrs. Crowley," she began, voice tentative yet edged with urgency, "I need to know everything. About the curse, the lanterns, the wraithany thing." Agnes's gaze held a flicker of sorrow, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she reached beneath an ancient cabinet and withdrew a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and softened by time. She set it on the table with a hollow thud. "My family," she whispered, "we tried to break the curse once. A long time ago. It was a mistake." Eleanor leaned forward, her fingers twitching with anticipation. "What happened?" A bitter smile tugged at Agnes's lips. "We thought we could outwit the darkness. We performed a ritual, much like the one that imprisoned the wraith. We believed we could sever the bond between the lanterns and the curse. But we were wrong." She opened the journal, revealing pages filled with dense script, diagrams of flickering flames entwined with shadowy figures and cryptic symbols. Eleanor's eyes scanned the faded ink, each word a piece of a harrowing puzzle. The ritual had backfired, unleashing a surge of malevolent energy that claimed the life of Agnes's daughter, Lydia, who vanished into the fog, lost to the wraith's grasp. Agnes's voice cracked as she recounted the heartbreak, the weight of guilt pressing on her like a shroud. "The wraith," Agnes said, "is bound to the lantern's light. It feeds on the fear and despair trapped within the fog. But it is not invincible. There are ways to weaken it." Eleanor's heart pounded, the flickering flame of hope battling the shadows of dread. "What ways?" The old woman hesitated, then produced a small, worn talisman from her pakita, delicate charm etched with runes that shimmered faintly in the lamp's glow. "This," Agnes explained, "can repel the wraith's touch, but only briefly. To truly break the curse, one must extinguish the lantern's light itself. But beware, the cost is great." Thomas, who had been silent until now, shifted uneasily, his restless fingers tracing the edge of a nearby candle. "Mother," he murmured, voice barely audible, "what if the wraith comes for us?" Eleanor placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, her resolve hardening. "We won't let it take us, not without a fight." Outside, the fog pressed like a living entity against the window panes, its cold breath seeping into the room, a constant, chilling reminder of the peril lurking just beyond the fragile walls. Agnes's protective charm glowed faintly, casting ethereal patterns on the ceiling, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. Eleanor's journal lay open on the table, its pages awaiting the next entry, a chronicle of fear, hope, and the desperate fight to reclaim Hollow Street from the endless night. The secrets revealed this night were a double-edged sword, offering both guidance and warning. As the candle's flame flickered, Eleanor knew the path forward was fraught with danger, but the stakes had never been higher. The curse's shadow loomed large, but so did the strength of a mother's love and a family's unyielding will to survive. The night outside deepened, swallowing the street in a thick veil of mist and silence. Within the flickering circle of light, Eleanor's eyes burned with determination. Tomorrow, the fight would begin, and the shadows would not wait. Hollow Street had never felt so suffocating. The fog, dense as a shroud, spilled over the cobblestones and crept beneath doorways, swallowing sound and light alike. It was as though the street itself had been swallowed by the breath of some great beast, silent and all-consuming. Eleanor Morland stood at the window of the parlor, her pale fingers pressed against the cold glass, eyes straining through the murk. The lanterns lining the street flickered weakly, their once steady glow now a desperate pulse in the thickening gloom. Neighbors moved hurriedly, their silhouettes blurred as they shuttered windows and barred doors before dusk could fully claim the day. The usual murmurs were gone, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed in like the fog itself. Behind Eleanor, the soft creak of floorboards announced Thomas's approach. Her son stood beside her, lean frame tense, tousled brown hair damp with the cold air seeping through the cracked window frame. His serious expression mirrored her own unease. "They're all shutting up early," he said quietly, voice barely audible above the muffled hush. "Even Martha closed her shutters an hour ago." Eleanor nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "The fog's worse tonight. It's like it's alive." Thomas glanced at the lantern hanging by the door, a dim, faltering light that refused to burn bright. He reached out, fingers brushing the cool glass as if willing it to glow steadier. "I'm going to try again tomorrow. Fix it." She gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know you will." The room was cold, the hearth unlit. Eleanor turned away from the window and made her way to the small desk tucked in the corner, cluttered with scraps of paper, old books, and her ever-present journal. Lighting a candle, she sat down, the flickering flame casting long shadows that danced across the walls like restless phantoms. Her pen hovered over the page, trembling slightly as she began to write. The fog thickens, swallowing the street whole. The lantern's light falters again tonight. It's as if the darkness itself is creeping closer, pulling at the edges of our sanctuary. Jacob's absence is a weight that never lifts each night. I feel him slipping further away, swallowed by this endless night. But I will not let this curse claim us all, not if I can help it. Her hand tightened around the pen, the scratch of ink against paper, a fragile anchor against the rising tide of despair. The memories of Jacob's last night haunted her, his pale face as he stepped into the fog, the whispered promise to return that never came. Guilt clawed at her heart, a relentless spectre as real as the shadows lurking outside. A sudden creak from the hallway startled her. Thomas entered, eyes dark and restless. "Mum, are you sure about all this? About the curse?" Eleanor looked up, meeting his gaze. "I don't know what to believe sometimes, but I do know this. We have to be ready. Whatever's out there, it's getting stronger." Outside, the fog thickened, muffling the distant toll of a bell, a reminder of time slipping away. The world beyond their walls was becoming a place of whispers and vanished souls. Hours later, a soft knock echoed through the house. Eleanor's heart leaped as she moved cautiously to the door. Upon opening, she found Agnes Crowley standing shrouded in mist, her sharp eyes gleaming with unspoken knowledge. The old woman's frail frame was wrapped in layers of threadbare cloth, talismans hanging from her neck catching the dim light. "Eleanor," Agnes whispered, voice gravelly yet urgent. The fog is more than just weather tonight. It carries the weight of a curse older than any of us. We have little time. Eleanor stepped aside, letting Agnes enter. The chill of the night seemed to follow her in, thick with secrets and impending dread. Together, they sat by the faltering lantern light, Agnes unraveling cryptic warnings wrapped in riddles and half-truths. The old woman's words stirred something deep within Eleanor, a resolve that had been buried beneath layers of grief. Thomas listened silently, his youthful skepticism battered by the weight of evidence and fear. The fog outside seemed to press against the windows, as if eager to snatch them from their fragile haven. As the candle guttered low, Eleanor closed her journal and looked out once more. The street was a ghostly blur, lanterns flickering weakly beneath the heavy veil of fog. Tomorrow, she promised herself, they would fight back. For Jacob, for Thomas, for the hope that one day, the dawn might finally break over Hollow Street again. But for now, the night held its breath, endless and unyielding. The first whisper of movement in the fog beyond the window sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. Somewhere in the swirling grey, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the light to fail completely, and Eleanor knew their time was running out. The lantern flickered once more, a faltering heartbeat in the choking dark, and then steadied a fragile promise in the endless night. The evening air hung heavy over Hollow Street, thick with the ever-present fog that swallowed sound and softened the glow of the lanterns to a ghostly haze. Eleanor Morland stood near the front window of their parlour, her sharp eyes straining into the swirling mist that pressed just beyond the glass. The faint outlines of shadowy forms flickered in and out of view, elusive yet undeniably there. She could feel their presence, a cold weight that settled in the marrow of her bones and whispered promises of despair. Thomas shifted uneasily at her side, his lean frame tense as he watched the wavering shapes. "Mother, are you sure this is safe?" His voice was low, edged with a restless fear that belied his usual composed demeanor. He had spent the day obsessing over the lantern, attempting to coax it back to a steady light. But now his energy had turned inward, his eyes darting nervously toward the thickening fog. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. She understood his fear. It gnawed at her as well, but she refused to let it rule her. "We have to be ready," she said quietly. "Agnes told me how to protect the house. We can hold them back, at least for now." The memory of Mrs. Agnes Crowley's cryptic visit earlier that day lingered in Eleanor's mind. The frail woman had shuffled into their home, clutching a small bundle of herbs and worn talismans. Her voice had been a mix of warning and encouragement, her eyes sharp beneath the silver strands pulled into a bun. "The phantoms are drawn to the failing light," Agnes had murmured, "but salt and chalk. Words spoken with care can keep them at bay for a time." Now, Eleanor knelt by the front door, her hands steady despite the cold that seeped into her fingers. She sprinkled a line of coarse salt across the threshold, the grains catching what little light the lantern provided. With a piece of white chalk, she traced intricate symbols along the doorframe, circles and crosses, shapes learned from Agnes's whispered instructions. As she worked, she whispered the incantations, her voice barely more than a breath, weaving ancient words into the stale air. Thomas watched her, a mix of skepticism and awe tightening his features. "Do you really believe this will work?" he asked, voice strained. Eleanor met his gaze, her dark eyes resolute. "We have no choice but to believe." The room seemed to hold its breath as the last symbol was drawn. Moments later, the temperature dropped sharply, and a faint, mournful whisper drifted beneath the door, slipping past the salt's barrier like a chilling caress. Thomas jumped, the first real sign that the unseen forces outside were aware of their defenses. "They're testing us," Eleanor said quietly, rising to her feet. She moved to the window again, hands clenched at her sides as she stared into the fog. The lantern's light flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls. For a moment, the phantoms seemed to press closer, their forms more distinct trait-like figures with hollow eyes, their faces contorted in silent screams. "Mother," Thomas's voice cracked, the veneer of calm breaking. "What if they break through?" Eleanor turned to him, her expression softening. "Then we fight, together." But even as she spoke the words, a gnawing doubt settled in her gut. The curse was growing stronger, feeding on their fear and the dimming light that once kept it at bay. The protection Agnes offered was tenuous, a fragile barrier against an ancient darkness that respected no boundary. That night, sleep eluded Eleanor. She sat by the window for hours, watching the lantern's flame, fragile and flickering, steady enough to hold back the fog's tendrils, but barely. The voices outside whispered incessantly, a symphony of sorrow and malice that clawed at her resolve. Thomas, restless and unable to sleep himself, paced the room, his youthful face shadowed with worry. "We can fix it," he insisted, his fingers itching to tinker with the lantern again. "It's just a light. We can make it burn bright." "It's more than a light," Eleanor said, voice heavy. "It's the prison and the prison guard. If it goes out, everything trapped here will be free." A sudden knock at the door jolted them both. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs as she moved cautiously to the entrance. No one was there, only the fog, thick and impenetrable, swirling around the doorstep like a living thing. As she closed the door, she caught a glimpse of a pale handprint fading on the glass, as if a desperate phantom had reached out for a way in. The night stretched on, a torment of shadows and whispered threats. Eleanor's protective circle held, but the cost was rising fear gnawing at her son, fracturing their trust. Thomas's restlessness grew into defiance, his young mind balking at the suffocating dread that gripped them. "You don't trust me," he accused one evening, voice sharp and raw. "You think I'll just run away like father did." The words struck Eleanor like a blow. She wanted to reassure him, to bridge the growing distance, but the weight of her own guilt and fear tangled her tongue. "I'm trying to keep us safe," she said finally, voice trembling. "I need you to believe that." But belief was a fragile thing on Hollow Street, where light and shadow waged a constant war, and the phantoms at the door waited patiently for a crack to slip inside. As the chapter closed, Eleanor stood once more by the window, the lantern's glow flickering precariously as ghostly figures drifted just beyond the glass. The battle to hold back the curse was only beginning, and the night was long and unyielding. The heavy fog pressed close against the windows of the moorland home, muffling the distant sounds of Hollow Street into a near silence that seemed unnatural in its stillness. Inside, the faint glow of the family lantern flickered steadily, its eerie light casting a wavering dance of shadows across the worn parlor walls. Eleanor Morland sat upright in her chair, her sharp eyes fixed on the young man opposite her. Samuel Hargrove, local newspaper reporter, was already jotting notes with a swift, practiced hand, but there was a tension in his posture, hesitance that betrayed the skepticism beneath his professional veneer. "So," Samuel began, voice low and measured, "you believe the disappearances are connected to these lanterns, the ones that never seem to go out?" Eleanor's gaze hardened, and she nodded slowly. "Not just believe, Mr. Hargrove. I know. The light is not a blessing, it's a curse." and it's weakening. Our lantern is dimming, and with it, the barrier that keeps us safe. You can call it that." Samuel raised an eyebrow, doubt flickering across his face. "A curse. You realize how that sounds?" "I do," Eleanor replied, voice steady but edged with an undercurrent of desperation. "But what other explanation is there when families vanish without a trace the moment night falls? When the fog thickens and phantoms flicker at the edges of vision? This street is trapped in an endless twilight, and I fear the light that holds us here is dying." Samuel scribbled more notes, his sharp eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Have you seen any of these phantoms yourself?" She paused, the weight of memories pressing down on her. "I have, and I've heard their whispers. They call out in the fog, voices from lost souls trapped here." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the scratch of Samuel's pen. Then, with a sudden resolve, he leaned forward. "Tell me about your husband. Jacob, was it?" Eleanor's fingers tightened around the edge of her shawl. "He vanished one night, walking into the fog despite my warnings. Never came back. It's why I'm determined to understand this curse, to make sure my son doesn't share the same fate." Samuel's expression flickered between sympathy and skepticism. "You're asking me to believe in ghosts and curses? As a man of reason, that's a hard sell." A faint, almost imperceptible whisper drifted through the cracked open window, carrying the chill of the fog inside. Samuel stiffened, eyes darting toward the source. Eleanor noticed and allowed herself a small, grim smile. "That's the truth of Hollow Street, Mr. Hargrove. The unseen holds more power here than the seen." Samuel swallowed hard, his usual quick wit caught off guard. "How long has this been going on?" "Generations," Eleanor said. "The lanterns have always burned, trapping us. But now, the light fades, and so does our safety." He scribbled the words, but this time, his pen moved more slowly, as if weighing each letter with newfound gravity. "Have you considered what breaking the curse might mean?" Eleanor's eyes shone with a fierce determination. "I have to, for Thomas, for this street." Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the distant outline of a shuttered home. The weight of history and fear hung palpably between them as Samuel closed his notebook. "I came here to report a story. I didn't expect to find this." She nodded. "Neither did I, but now that you know, you can't ignore it." For a moment, the two sat in the dim light, the flickering lantern casting uncertain shadows that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of Hollow Street itself. Trust was a fragile thing here, but in that shared silence, a tentative bond began to form. "I'll keep an open mind," Samuel said finally. "But I need proof. Solid evidence." Eleanor's gaze met his unwavering. "Then you'd better be ready to find it." As the night deepened, the fog pressed closer, and the street lanterns flickered faintly in the distance. The first faint notes of a whispered menace weaving through the darkness. The story was far from over indeed. It was only just beginning. The chill in the air seemed to settle deeper into the bones of the house as Eleanor led Samuel to the window. Outside, the mist curled like living smoke, swallowing sound and light. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed shut, its echo swallowed before it could fully form. Samuel's eyes searched the shadows, the reporter's instinct wrestling with the creeping dread. "You say the lanterns are the prison," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Then what's inside? What are we really trapped with?" Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. The lantern wraith, a spirit born of pain and rage, bound to the light to keep us locked in this endless night. Samuel shivered, though whether from cold or fear he could not say. And you think it's weakening? Yes, Eleanor said. And if it breaks free, no one will be safe. The reporter's pen lay forgotten on the table as the weight of her words settled between them. Outside, the fog shifted, and a faint flicker of light winked in the distance. A warning or a beckonet was impossible to tell. Samuel looked back at Eleanor, the skepticism in his eyes giving way to something new, a reluctant acceptance of a darkness he could no longer deny. "All right," he said quietly, "I'm in. Tell me everything." Eleanor nodded, the faintest glow of hope stirring amid the dread. The battle for Hollow Street was no longer hers alone. And as the lantern flickered once more, the shadows deepened, waiting. The parlor was suffused with an almost electric stillness, broken only by the faint crackling of the lantern's flame. Eleanor Morland sat rigidly in her worn armchair, her sharp eyes fixed upon the flickering glow before her. For days, the lantern had been a pale, trembling ember, its light barely holding against the oppressive fog that swallowed Hollow Street whole each night. But now, inexplicably, the flame surged, brightening with a sudden clarity that bathed the room in an amber warmth. Thomas stood nearby, his lean frame tense as he watched the shifting shadows dance across the walls. His tousled brown hair caught the glow, and his serious expression betrayed the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. He clutched a small toolkit tightly, fingers twitching with restless energy. "It's brighter," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might snuff out the fragile light. Eleanor nodded slowly, a flicker of something long dormant kindling within her chest. "Hope. It's not just the light," she said, voice steadying. "It's a sign. We have a chance." The room's door creaked open, and a slender figure entered, Mrs. Agnes Crowley. Wrapped in layers of faded shawls, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun. She moved with a deliberate grace, her sharp eyes glowing faintly in the lantern's renewed illumination. In her hands, she carried a bundle of brittle papers, bound with a faded red ribbon. "I've spent these past nights poring over the archives," Agnes explained, her voice a low rasp. "There's a ritual, incomplete, fragmented, that might sever the lantern wraith's hold. But it's dangerous, and it demands sacrifice." Eleanor rose, heart pounding. "Tell me everything." Agnes spread the yellowed pages across the scarred table, the lantern casting flickering light that brought the ancient ink to life. Cryptic symbols twisted and coiled like serpents, accompanied by hand-scrawled annotations in a spidery script. Eleanor leaned in, tracing the lines with her eyes, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down. "The curse," Agnes continued, "was born from a failed ritual centuries ago. The wraith was bound to the lanterns to imprison a malevolent force, but in doing so, it trapped the souls of those who stepped beyond their doorsteps after dusk." Thomas moved closer, studying the diagrams with a furrowed brow. "What kind of sacrifice?" he asked. Agnes's gaze flickered to Eleanor. "It demands a willing soul to extinguish the cursed light from within. Without it, the curse cannot be broken." A heavy silence settled over the room. Eleanor felt the weight of her late husband's absence, the haunting void that Jacob's disappearance had carved into her life. The dimming lantern had seemed an omen of doom, but now, with its sudden flare, it whispered of possibility. Outside, the fog thickened, swirling like a living thing. Eleanor glanced toward the window, sensing the unseen eyes of the lantern wraith pressing against their fragile sanctuary. The air vibrated with an eerie cadence, as if the street itself were holding its breath. "We have to act," Eleanor said, voice firm despite the tremor beneath. "If we wait, more will vanish." Thomas nodded, setting down his toolkit. "I'll make sure the lantern is ready. Whatever comes, we face it together." Agnes placed a gnarled hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Be cautious. The wraith feeds on fear and doubt. Your strength will be your shield. That night, as the lantern cast a steady, golden glow, Eleanor sat at the worn desk and opened her journal. Her pen moved swiftly, etching her thoughts, fears, and plans onto the paper. Each word was a prayer, a promise to fight the darkness that sought to consume them. The flicker of hope was fragile, a brief pulse against the endless night. But within that light, Eleanor found the courage to face the shadow, to confront the curse that had held Hollow Street captive for generations. As the fog pressed closer and the lantern's flames steadied, the Moreland family prepared to step beyond the threshold of fear and into the heart of the unknown. The battle for their home and their souls was about to begin, and somewhere in the depths of the swirling mist, the lantern wraith stirred, sensing the challenge, ready to defend its eternal dominion. The chill in the Moreland household deepened with the lantern's faltering glow. Eleanor sat slumped in the dim parlor, the one light casting long, quivering shadows that danced just beyond the edges of her vision. The fog outside thickened like a living thing, swallowing the world whole, muffling sounds and smearing the few remaining lanterns into ghostly orbs that blinked uncertainly in the haze. Her eyes, sharp and restless, darted toward the small flame in the ornate lantern perched on the windowsill. The light had been a steady sentinel for generations in Hollow Street, its glow a quiet defiance against the endless night. But tonight it shuddered and flickered, the flame sputtering as if struggling to breathe. Eleanor's heart clenched. This was no mere flicker, was a portent, the first tangible sign that the curse was tightening its grip, that the fragile barrier between them and the consuming fog was fraying. She rubbed her temples, trying to silence the creeping panic that threatened to overwhelm her. Yet the memories surged unbidden, dark and sharp as shards of glass. Jacob's face haunted her dreams, his eyes wide with terror as he vanished that fateful night, swallowed by the mist after stepping beyond the lantern's light. A sudden noise startled her, a soft, tentative knock on the parlor door. Thomas stepped inside, his lean frame silhouetted against the gloom. His brown hair was tousled, and his usual serious expression was marred by exhaustion and worry. "Mother," he whispered, voice tight with unease. "The lantern's almost out." "I tried everything, leaned the glass, replaced the oil, but it just won't hold." Eleanor's gaze followed his to the lantern. The flame, a fragile tongue of orange, flickered erratically, casting grotesque shapes that slid across the walls like phantoms. "It's going," she murmured, the weight of her words sinking like a stone. Thomas swallowed hard, stepping closer to the window, peering out into the suffocating fog. The world beyond was a blur of grey, a void where shapes shifted and vanished before his eyes. "It's like the fog's swallowing everything," he said, voice barely audible. "I'm scared, Mother. What if it's our turn next?" Eleanor reached out, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "We won't let that happen. We have to be stronger, stronger than the fear." But even as she spoke, a knot of dread coiled tighter in her chest. The darkness was no longer just outside. It was seeping into their home, into their minds. That night, sleep was a battleground. Eleanor's dreams twisted into nightmarish visions. She found herself standing in a dense, swirling fog, the lantern's flame guttering and dying in her hand. Jacob appeared, his face pale and drawn, reaching out then dissolving into shadow. Behind him, the lantern wraith loomed, a shifting mass of light and mist, its hollow eyes burning with ancient sorrow and wrath. She woke with a start, her skin clammy, heart pounding against her ribs like a frantic drum. The room was black, but for the faint, dying glow of the lantern. She sat up, clutching the thin quilt around her shoulders, fighting the tremors that threatened to consume her. Morning came reluctantly, the fog stubbornly clinging to the street like a shroud. Eleanor found Thomas already awake, sitting by the lantern, his fingers brushing the glass as if willing the light back to life. "We have to find Agnes," Eleanor said, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "She knows more than anyone about the curse and how to fight it." Thomas looked up, hope flickering briefly in his eyes before doubt took hold. "Do you really think she can help, or are we just running out of time?" Eleanor met his gaze, the determination hardening within her. "We don't have a choice. The darkness is gathering, but so are we." Later that day, the fog thickened to a suffocating wall outside their door. The usual sounds of the street children's laughter, the clatter of footsteps, the distant hum of life were swallowed by a dense silence. Eleanor, Thomas, and Agnes huddled inside the moorland parlor, their faces lit only by a meager candle flickering against the encroaching gloom. Agnes's eyes, sharp and knowing, scanned the room. "The lantern's dying because the curse feeds on fear," she said quietly. "As the light fades, the wraith grows stronger. We must hold fast, or it will claim us all." Eleanor nodded, clutching her journal filled with notes and sketches from her investigations. "Then we fight it not with light, but with courage." Thomas shifted uneasily, the weight of impending doom pressing on him like the fog outside. "And if it's not enough," Agnes's gaze softened, "then we face the darkness together." As night fell once more, the lantern flickered its last brave defiance before succumbing to the shadows. The fog pressed close, a living, breathing entity that whispered promises of oblivion and despair. Yet within the moorland home, a fragile flame of resolve burned brighter than any lantern ever could. Eleanor stared into the abyss, the chill biting deep into her bones. The gathering darkness was not just around them, it was inside them, testing their will, their spirit. But she would not yield. For Jacob, for Thomas, for all those lost to the endless night, the battle was just beginning. The fog was a living thing, thick and suffocating, clinging to Eleanor Morland's skin and filling her lungs with its cold, damp breath. Each step she took was tentative, a cautious dance around unseen roots and broken stones hidden beneath the murky veil. Agnes Crowley walked just ahead, her silver hair pulled tight in a bun, her eyes sharp despite the deep lines of age etched into her face. Thomas trailed slightly behind, his youthful features set in a grim mask of determination and fear. The lantern Eleanor carried in one hand cast a flickering circle of pale light, its flame trembling as if it sensed the weight of the night pressing down upon them. They had ventured far beyond the last shuttered windows of Hollow Street, into the heart of the endless night, where the fog was thickest and the lantern's glow faded into ghostly embers. Eleanor's breath came in shallow gasps, her mind racing with the dark knowledge Agnes had revealed in recent days. The curse that gripped their home was older than any living memory, tied to a ritual long since failed and forgotten, or so the faded inscriptions suggested. Suddenly, Agnes stopped. "Here," she whispered, voice rough like dry leaves. Eleanor moved closer, the lantern casting long shadows across a moss-covered stone altar partially buried beneath the choking earth. The circular structure was ancient, worn by time and weather, yet the strange inscriptions etched into its surface glowed faintly, a pale luminescence that pulsed in harmony with the lantern's flicker. Eleanor knelt, tracing the symbols with trembling fingers. "This is where it began," she murmured. "The ritual that bound the lantern wraith." Thomas leaned in, eyes wide beneath tousled brown hair. "Is this why the lanterns never go out?" Agnes nodded, her gaze distant and haunted. "The light is a prison, a cage for the souls trapped within Hollow Street. The wraith is both guardian and jailer, bound to this cursed glow." As the words settled into the cold air, a sudden chill swept through the clearing. The lantern's flame flickered violently, casting monstrous, shifting silhouettes that danced on the fog like living nightmares. Eleanor felt a presence coiling around them, unseen but palpable, a darkness that pressed against their fragile circle of light. "We are not alone," Agnes warned, clutching a talisman hidden beneath her cloak. Thomas stiffened, his eyes darting toward the shadows. Eleanor's heart pounded, her resolve hardening. "We came for answers. We will not turn back now." With a steadying breath, she lifted the lantern higher, its flame battling the encroaching gloom. The fog seemed to pulse with silent menace, but the trio pressed forward, determined to uncover the secrets that might finally break the curse. Every step deeper into the night was a step closer to the lantern wraith, and the terrible truth that awaited them. The oppressive silence was shattered by a faint whispering voices, carried on the cold wind, teasing the edges of sanity. Eleanor's journal, tucked safely in her coat, seemed to hum with the weight of all the dread she had documented: the vanished neighbors, the restless shadows, the endless night that threatened to consume them all. In that moment, with the fog swirling thick around them and the lantern's light wavering, Eleanor understood that their journey had crossed the edge of night itself. The battle for Hollow Street's soul was about to begin, and there was no turning back. She glanced at Agnes, whose eyes gleamed with a mixture of fear and hope, then at Thomas, whose youthful face bore the first true signs of courage. Together, they faced the darkness, a trio bound by blood, secrets, and the desperate need to reclaim their home from the shadows. The night stretched endless before them, a vast and merciless sea of fog and phantoms. But Eleanor's grip on the lantern was firm, and her heart, though heavy with dread, beat with fierce determination. For the first time in decades, beneath the suffocating shroud of Hollow Street, a flicker of defiance ignited in the darkness. As they stepped forward, the ancient stones beneath their feet whispered forgotten names, the air thick with the weight of centuries. The lantern wraith watched, waiting, its shadowy form coalescing within the mist, bound by light and curse alike. The edge of night had been reached, and the morrow's promise hung by a fragile thread. The fog pressed in like a living thing, suffocating, and cold as Eleanor Morland stepped cautiously forward, her breath shallow in the heavy air. Around her, the lanterns on Hollow Street flickered uncertainly, their eternal glow wavering as if struggling against some unseen force. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the unsteady light. Every step weighted with dread and determination. Behind her, Thomas and Mrs. Agnes Crowley followed silently, their faces pale but resolute. They had reached the heart of the nightmare that had haunted Hollow Street for generations, the lantern wraith. A low, shifting shadow coalesced ahead, its form elusive and unstable, wreathed in flickering light and swirling mist. The wraith's presence was both terrifying and sorrowful, a spectral guardian bound to the cursed lanterns that imprisoned the street in endless night. Eleanor's sharp eyes locked onto the shadowy figure, feeling the oppressive weight of centuries-old sorrow and malevolence emanating from it. "Why do you persist?" Eleanor demanded, voice steady despite the chill crawling up her spine. "Why hold this place in darkness? Why trap innocent souls?" The wraith's form shimmered, light flickering like dying embers. Its voice, when it came, was a mournful whisper carried on the wind, tinged with anguish. Bound by a ritual gone awry, I am both jailer and guardian. The curse was meant to imprison a greater evil, but in doing so, I was chained to these lanterns and this endless night. Eleanor listened, the weight of its confession settling heavy in her chest. The entity was no mere monster. It was a tragic remnant of a desperate past, its existence a cruel paradox. It had become the very thing it sought to contain, condemning the street and its people in an eternal twilight. Thomas shifted uneasily beside her, his youthful face drawn tight with fear and resolve. "There has to be a way to end this," he whispered, his eyes flicking nervously to the unsteady lantern light. Agnes, her voice a brittle breath, added, "The failed ritual left wounds that bleed through time. To sever the bond, a sacrifice must be made, one that is both willing and profound." Eleanor's mind raced. The cost was clear, and yet the thought of surrendering anything at all to this cursed existence was agonizing. But to do nothing was to condemn her family and the street forever. The wraith's flickering form drifted closer, its presence both suffocating and sorrowful. "You possess the courage I lack. Will you take the burden upon yourself to free us all?" Time seemed to stretch, the fog swirling in hypnotic eddies around them, the lantern's light pulsing in tandem with Eleanor's pounding heart. She reached out, her hand trembling but resolute, the weight of countless vanished souls pressing upon her. "I will," she whispered, as the wraith's form shimmered and dissolved into the mist. The lanterns flared brightly one last time before flickering uncertainly. Eleanor felt the sharp sting of sacrifice clawing at her soul, but beneath it all, a fragile hope took root. This confrontation marked the turning point, the beginning of the end for the curse that had held Hollow Street captive. Yet as Eleanor faced the dark unknown, she understood that the price of freedom was steep and the night was far from over. The fog thickened once more, swallowing the fading light. As Eleanor prepared herself for the final ordeal that would decide the fate of her family and the street she called home, the lantern wraith had spoken, and now the ultimate sacrifice awaited. Would Eleanor's courage be enough to break the chains of endless night? Or would the darkness claim her as it had so many before? The answer lay shrouded in the swirling mists, where light and shadow danced their eternal dance, waiting for dawn's fragile promise to break through. The air was thick with a suffocating silence, broken only by the faint sputtering of the lantern in Eleanor's trembling hand. The ever-burning light, once a steady guardian against the encroaching night, now flickered violently as if struggling against an unseen force. Around her, the fog writhed like a living thing, twisting and curling through the narrow cobblestone street like spectral serpents. The shadows cast by the lantern danced and stretched grotesquely, seeping into the mist and coalescing into forms that chilled Eleanor's heart. The lantern wraith was near. Eleanor's knuckles whitened as she gripped the lantern's handle tighter. The dimming glow illuminated her pale face, etched with lines of fear and resolve. Behind her, the faint outlines of Thomas and Agnes hovered at the edge of the fog, their presence a fragile tether to reality in this nightmare. Agnes clutched a worn talisman, her lips moving in a low, urgent murmur of incantation, while Thomas's restless gaze flicked between the lantern and the thickening shadows. "It's time," Eleanor whispered, voice steady despite the tempest raging within her. The street around them seemed to hold its breath, the usual cacophony of ghostly whispers now a tense hush. The lantern wraith's figure shimmered, a shifting mass of darkness interlaced with flickering light, its presence oppressive and suffocating. Eleanor could feel its gaze like icy tendrils probing her soul, weighing her worth, daring her to falter. She thought of Jacob, her lost husband, whose disappearance had haunted her every waking moment. She thought of the neighbors lost to the cursed night, their homes sealed behind shuttered windows, their fates a grim warning. And most of all, she thought of Thomas, her son, growing braver each day, yet still vulnerable to the creeping darkness. Drawing a shuddering breath, Eleanor lifted the lantern higher. The flame sputtered, casting grotesque shadows that stretched like claws toward her. The whispers grew louder, angry and desperate, voices from beyond the veil crying out in protest. The lantern wraith surged forward, a storm of shadow and flickering flame. Its form both terrifying and tragic, prisoner bound to the cursed light it protected. "Eleanor, no," Annis's voice trembled, but Eleanor shook her head. "There is no other way. If I do not extinguish this light, we remain prisoners forever." Thomas stepped closer, his youthful face set in grim determination. "I'm with you, Mother. Whatever happens." The lantern's flame danced wildly, the air thick with electric tension. Eleanor's hand reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed the glass globe. A sudden roar of spectral voices erupted around them, the fog swirling violently as the boundary between worlds thinned. Heart pounding, Eleanor closed her eyes and snuffed out the lantern's light. In that instant, a piercing silence shattered the night. The shadows recoiled. The lantern wraith's form unraveling into mist and darkness before vanishing like a nightmare at dawn. The fog began to lift, dissipating slowly to reveal the familiar outlines of hollow streets, time-worn houses, bathed in the faint glow of the first natural stars in decades. Eleanor sank to her knees, breath ragged, the weight of sacrifice pressing down like stone. Thomas knelt beside her, hands steadying her shaking form. Agnes approached, her face softening with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "It is done," Agnes whispered. "The curse is broken." Eleanor's eyes opened, reflecting the starlit sky above and the fragile hope it carried. Yet within her a quiet darkness lingered, the cost of freedom etched deep into her soul. As dawn approached, the survivors of Hollow Street gathered silently, their faces marked by loss and tentative hope. The endless night was over, but the memory of its shadows would haunt them forever. Outside, the last flicker of the cursed lantern's light died, leaving Hollow Street to finally rest in the embrace of true darkness and the promise of a new day. The sacrifice was complete, but the question remained. Had Eleanor truly freed them all, or merely delayed the inevitable return of the darkness? The night held its secrets close, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The hour was unlike any Hollow Street had witnessed in decades. For so long, the street had been imprisoned beneath a suffocating veil of fog, the eternal glow of lanterns casting a cursed light that never faltered, never faded. Yet now, as the first faint blush of dawn tinged the horizon, a transformation stirred in the very air, subtle, hesitant, but irrevocable. Eleanor Morland stood by the window of her modest parlor, her breath fogging the cold glass as she gazed out onto the street below. The fog, once a dense, unmoving shroud, had begun to thin, retreating like a reluctant tide. She could hear a tentative bird call, a fragile melody that seemed almost foreign after years of silence. The lantern outside her home, the very same that had begun to dim those many nights ago, flickered once more. Then, as if releasing its final breath, the flame extinguished completely. A hush fell over Hollow Street. The perpetual twilight that had defined every waking moment seemed to lift, replaced by the soft, natural glow of dawn. The lingering mist caught the early light, sparkling like fragile crystal beads, and the scent of damp earth and old stone filled the morning air. Eleanor's heart pounded with a mixture of relief and a sorrow so deep it felt like an ache in her bones. Thomas appeared in the doorway behind her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Mother, it's really dawn. The fog's lifting." She nodded, unable to speak at first, then whispered, "It's over, Thomas. The curse is broken." Together, they stepped outside, their footsteps echoing softly on the worn cobblestones. The street, once a ghostly tunnel of shadows and mist, was revealing its true face: cracked paving stones, creeping ivy, and gardens overrun with wildflowers and weeds. Neighbors, their faces etched with exhaustion and disbelief, began emerging from shuttered homes. Martha Griggs shuffled forward, her trembling hands clutching a shawl tighter around her frail shoulders. "Is it true?" Martha asked, voice quivering, the nights lifting. Eleanor smiled gently, placing a steadying hand on the elderly woman's arm. "Yes, Martha, the night is finally ending." Down the street, Samuel Hargrove moved among the gathering crowd, notebook in hand, his youthful energy a sharp contrast to the weariness around him. He paused to speak with Agnes Crowley, who stood quietly holding a small, unlit candle. The old woman's eyes, sharp and bright despite her years, filled with tears as she struck a match and lit the wick, the flame dancing softly in the morning light. "A new beginning," Agnes murmured, her voice thick with emotion. The street filled with a gentle murmur of voices, tentative greetings, whispered prayers, and stories of loss. Eleanor felt the weight of years settle around her, mingling with a fragile hope. There was much to mourn: the neighbors who never returned, the friends swallowed by the fog, and the countless nights spent in fearful vigil beneath the lantern's cursed glow. Yet, beneath the sorrow, a pulse of resilience beat strong. Hands clasped, eyes met, and in that fragile community, a tentative promise took root to rebuild, to remember, and to face the coming days together. As the sun rose higher, casting warm gold across the street's worn facades, Eleanor returned inside. She sat at her desk and opened her journal, the familiar weight of pen in hand grounding her. She began to write, her words flowing like a balm to her weary soul, reflections on sacrifice, on the price of forbidden knowledge, and on the enduring strength of those who had survived the endless night. Outside, the last tendrils of fog curled and faded into the waking light. But even as dawn bathed Hollow Street in warmth, Eleanor's gaze drifted to the shadows beneath the old lantern posts. There, faint wisps lingered, ghosts of the past, reminders that some darkness never fully disappears. The story of Hollow Street was far from over. "We have survived," Eleanor whispered to the quiet room, "and now we must live." The dawn's light promised a new chapter, one of healing, of reckoning, and of hope. But the shadows would remain, etched forever in the memories of those who had endured the cursed light and the endless night it cast. And in those shadows, Eleanor knew the true test of their resilience was only just beginning. The morning light that spilled tentatively onto Hollow Street was unlike anything the residents had seen in decades. As the fog lifted, revealing the worn cobblestones and shuttered windows, a fragile silence hung in the air, a silence filled not with peace, but with the weight of absence. Eleanor Morland stood at the threshold of her home, her sharp eyes tracing the contours of the street bathed in an unaccustomed glow. The ever-burning lanterns had finally extinguished, their cursed light replaced by the natural dawn. Yet, the liberation felt incomplete. Her gaze drifted toward the empty houses, the spaces once occupied by neighbors who had vanished into the endless night. The hollow echoes of their lives lingered like ghosts, their absence a stark reminder of the price paid for freedom. Eleanor's heart clenched, a muted ache that no light could dispel. She turned inward, reflecting on the sacrifices that had brought them hither, sacrifices of loved ones, the burdens borne silently, and the fragile hope that now fluttered in the morning air. Inside the Morland household, the atmosphere was thick with a different tension. Thomas sat hunched over the small wooden table, his tousled brown hair falling over his serious eyes. The relief that once shone in his gaze had dimmed, replaced by a restlessness that mirrored Eleanor's own turmoil. The boy's fingers traced absent patterns on the worn surface, his mind wrestling with the scars left by the curse. "Mother," he began hesitantly, voice trembling with conflicting emotions, "do you think we can ever really be free, after everything?" Eleanor met his eyes, her own weary yet resolute. "Freedom isn't just about the curse ending, Thomas. It's about what we do with what's left, the memories, the pain, and the choices ahead." Their conversation stretched into the dimming light of the evening, a delicate dance of frustration, love, and vulnerability. Thomas wrestled with the loss of innocence and the burden of knowledge, while Eleanor grappled with the guilt of her decisions and the hope of guiding her son toward healing. Outside their home, the community was stirring, tentative yet compelled to face the new reality. A town meeting was convened in the old community holospace that had long been silent, now filled with the voices of survivors. Faces etched with exhaustion and grief gathered, some shadowed by blame, others brightened by cautious optimism. Martha Griggs, trembling hands clutching her shawl, spoke softly of the nights spent barricaded indoors, the terror of unseen watchers in the fog. Samuel Hargrove, his sharp features marked by sleepless nights of investigation, challenged the crowd to confront the truths that had long been buried beneath superstition and fear. The meeting became a crucible of shared sorrow and tentative hope. Accusations mingled with apologies. Memories of vanished neighbors were honored alongside plans for rebuilding. The community, fractured by decades of isolation and dread, began the slow, painful process of healing. Meanwhile, in the quiet seclusion of her home, Agnes Crowley sat among her strange talismans and fading parchments, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun. Her sharp eyes reflected the dim light of a single candle as she clutched a worn amulet close to her chest. The weight of her family's tragic legacy settled heavily upon her shoulders. Agnes's mind wandered to her daughter Lydia, lost to the fog years ago, a symbol of the stakes and sorrow that the curse had wrought. The failed ritual that had bound the lantern wraith haunted her still, a reminder of the fine line between protection and imprisonment. Yet despite the cost, Agnes bore her knowledge with quiet dignity, resolved to aid the street's fragile rebirth in whatever way she could. As night fell once more, the natural darkness of the world returned to Hollow Street, unadorned by cursed light. Eleanor stood by the window, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky. The phantoms and the fog had vanished, but their memory lingered in every shadow and whisper. Her journal lay open on the desk, pages filled with the chronicles of fear, courage, and sacrifice. The story of Hollow Street was far from over. It was a story of resilience, the resilience of a community that had endured unending night and now faced the daunting dawn. Eleanor's thoughts turned to the future, uncertain yet unyielding. The legacy of the curse would remain etched in the hearts of those who survived. But so too would the lessons learned, the bonds forged in darkness, and the fragile hope that true light could one day fully return. And so, as the last lanterns lay cold and dark, the people of Hollow Street stepped forward into a world reshaped by loss and illuminated by the first fragile rays of a new day. But the shadows of the past were never fully gone, and Eleanor knew that the price of forbidden knowledge was a burden that might never truly lift. The night had ended, but its echoes would haunt the street and her soul for years to come. With a deep breath, Eleanor closed her journal and prepared to face whatever dawn would bring next. Her resolve, tempered by sorrow and hope, intertwined. The last lantern sputtered once, twice, and then was gone. It was a quiet extinguishing, almost imperceptible save for the faintest sigh of wind that swept through Hollow Street, pushing the ever-present fog aside like a curtain drawn back to reveal a stage long hidden in darkness. Eleanor Morland stood in the middle of the cobblestone road, her eyes fixed on the place where the lantern had burned so steadfastly for as long as she could remember. Now, for the first time in decades, natural light spilled into the street, soft, golden, and trembling with the tentative promise of dawn. She breathed in deeply, the cool morning air tasting faintly of wet earth and distant rain, a stark contrast to the stale, oppressive stillness that had choked Hollow Street for so long. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional drip of dew from the eaves of shuttered houses. The fog that had clung to the street like a living thing was thinning, revealing the worn facades of the Victorian homes scarred by time and terror. Eleanor's heart was heavy, weighed down by the memories that the lifting mist brought with it. The vanished families, the whispered warnings, the nights spent in fearful vigil beside the flickering lantern, they all lingered like shadows beneath the rising sun. Her fingers tightened around the leather-bound journal she carried everywhere, the pages filled with her painstaking accounts of the curse, the phantoms, and the sacrifices made. Inside the Morland home, a fragile peace settled. Thomas sat near the window, his eyes wide as they adjusted to the brightness seeping through the glass. The shadows that had once seemed to curl and writhe in every corner were gone, replaced by the gentle illumination of dawn. He looked out at the street, his expression a mixture of awe and uncertainty, as if the world itself had shifted beneath his feet. "Do you think it's really over?" he asked quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them like a fragile thread. Eleanor turned to him, her gaze soft yet resolute. "I believe it is. The curse that held us prisoner has been broken. But the scars it left, those will remain for a long time." Across the street, the door to Mrs. Agnes Crowley's home creaked open. The frail woman stepped out, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes sharp despite her years. She approached slowly, leaning on her cane, and stopped beside Eleanor and Thomas. "It is over," Agnes said, voice low but steady. "The price was high, but the curse has ended. Hollow Street will never be the same, but there is hope now." Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of Agnes's words settle around them. They stood together in the quiet morning, the ghosts of the past whispering just beyond the edges of their vision. The street was free, yes, but the memories, the endless night, the cursed light, the phantoms and the fog, those would endure in the hearts of those who survived. As the sun climbed higher, the residents of Hollow Street began to emerge from their homes, blinking against the unfamiliar brightness, faces etched with grief and tentative hope. The long nightmare was over, but the journey to healing had only just begun. Eleanor closed her journal and looked once more down the street, where the last lantern's faint glow had faded into nothingness. She whispered a prayer to the lost, to the brave, and to the future. May we never forget the price of light. And with that, the shadows receded, and Hollow Street stepped into a dawn it had not known for generations.